Hello, everyone. If you've tuned in for Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution's Ocean Encounters presentation, Weirdly Wonderful, Creatures of the Ocean Twilight Zone, you're in the right place. Coming up, we'll hear from WHOI biologist Heidi Sosik, WHOI fish ecologist Joel Llopiz, and neurophysiologist and OceanX Vice Chairman Vince Pieribone. And while you're waiting, please go to the keepitweird.org website to find your weird and see what ocean twilight zone creature you're most like. Hi, everybody. In just a few minutes, we'll get started with Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution's Ocean Encounters presentation, Weirdly Wonderful, Creatures of the Ocean Twilight Zone. We've still got a lot of people joining us, so thank you for your patience. And in the meantime, please take our quiz to find out which Twilight Zone creature you're most like. It's part of our campaign to raise awareness about the Ocean Twilight Zone and preserve the next generation of weird. Discover your weird and take the quiz at keepitweird.org. Hello, everyone. In just a minute here, we'll get started with Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution's Ocean Encounters presentation, Weirdly Wonderful, Creatures of the Ocean Twilight Zone. We're giving people just a little extra time today to take our quiz, which is at keepitweird.org. Find your inner weird there and see what Ocean Twilight Zone creature you're most like. You'll be helping us raise awareness of the Ocean Twilight Zone and preserve the next generation of weird. Hi, everybody. If you've tuned in for Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution's Ocean Encounters presentation, Weirdly Wonderful Creatures of the Ocean Twilight Zone, you are in the right place. Coming up, we'll be hearing from WHOI biologist Heidi Sosik, WHOI fish ecologist Joel Llopiz, and neurophysiologist and OceanX vice chairman Vince Pieribone. While you're waiting, please take our quiz at keepitweird.org to find your weird and see what ocean Twilight Zone creature you are most like.
The ocean covers 70% of the globe. It gives us oxygen and food and millions of jobs. It brings joy and shapes our climate and weather. The ocean is life, and it belongs to everyone. Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution is the world's independent leader in ocean discovery, exploration, and education, working to understand and sustain one of humanity's most precious common resources. Join us today for our ocean, our planet, and our future.
Welcome to the season finale of Ocean Encounters virtual series from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, or WHOI as we like to call it for short. Tonight's presentation is Weirdly Wonderful Creatures of the Ocean Twilight Zone. My name is Véronique LaCapra, and I'll be your host for tonight's event. WHOI's Ocean Encounters online events are made possible in part by the Avatar Alliance Foundation and Dalio Philanthropies. Tonight, we'd also like to thank the generous supporters of WHOI's Ocean Twilight Zone project, which you'll be hearing more about tonight. They are the Dalio Foundation, the Robertson Foundation, the James family, the Craig and Susan McCaw Foundation, and 2 anonymous donors. Thank you to them and to all of our sponsors. Before we hear from our presenters, I'd like to take a minute to share some tips on how you can optimize your Zoom experience with us. Throughout tonight's event, we'll be taking questions from all of you. If you'd like to participate in this live Q&A, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and type the question in the window that appears. You might be more familiar with the chat function in Zoom, but please use the Q&A function tonight instead. We often get hundreds of questions, so I apologize in advance if we don't get to yours while we're live. You can ask questions at any time, starting now. I also want to let you know that we are recording this event. That recording will be made available on the whoi.edu website. We had more than 1,700 people pre-register to join us tonight, so you are in very good company. Thank you and welcome to all of you. Tonight, we're going on a deep dive into the ocean's twilight zone, one of the weirdest places on Earth. This vast, dark layer of the ocean, hundreds of feet below the surface, is home to an abundance of weirdly wonderful creatures. Their unusual characteristics give them what we like to call superpowers, special adaptations to survive in a world of darkness, extreme pressure, frigid cold, and equally superpowered predators. The Twilight Zone is a place of wonder, mystery, and abundance, and the more we learn about it, the more it reminds us that our choices can mean the difference between harming our planet and sustaining it. As you may know, we recently launched a campaign to raise awareness about the Ocean Twilight Zone and celebrate the amazing animals that live there and the wonderful weirdness in all of us. If you've taken our quiz to find out which Twilight Zone creature you are most like at keepitweird.org, we'd like to find out which creature you were matched up with. You'll be seeing a poll appear on your screen in just a second here, and we would like you to pick the Twilight Zone creature that you were matched up with when you took our quiz. Are you a fangtooth? Are you a salp? Maybe you're a strawberry squid. I'm the Mesobot, by the way. That's our Ocean Twilight Zone exploring robot. It can stealthily follow animals around without disturbing them. I guess that makes sense for a former reporter. All right, looks like we have quite a few siphonophores, quite a few fangtooths, and quite a few fellow mesobots, so that's terrific. All right. Thank you for participating in that poll. Now I'd like to welcome our guests for this evening. They are all scientists and ocean twilight zone explorers. All right. Welcome, everybody. Heidi, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Véronique. Hi, everyone. My name is Heidi Sosik. I'm a biologist, inventor, and explorer, and I'm the lead scientist for WHOI's Ocean Twilight Zone, or OTZ, project. I study the microscopic life forms known as plankton that are the base of ocean food webs, and they also play a really important role in removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
Thanks, Heidi. Joel, how about you?
Hi, everyone. I'm Joel Llopiz. Heidi and I work together on WHOI's OTZ project. I'm a fish and zooplankton ecologist. I'm a first-gen college graduate. My father's from Cuba. And all of us here at WHOI are on the land of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. On the OTZ project, I study ocean twilight zone food webs, so who eats whom, and how fish live their lives, including how long they live and how well they reproduce.
Okay, and last but not least, Vincent. Some of you in our audience may remember Vincent from our 2020 Ocean Encounters event about extreme ocean machines featuring Jim Cameron. Vince, tell us a little about yourself.
Thank you, Véronique. My name is Vincent Pieribone. I am a professor at Yale University, neurophysiologist. I'm also the vice president of an organization called OceanX, which has tight collaborations with WHOI. I'm a neurophysiologist, but I study a lot of creatures that happen to live in the twilight zone. So I have a particular affinity for glowing creatures that live in the twilight zone. And
we'll hear more about that in just a minute. But to start off with, I'd kind of like to start us all on the same place, the same playing field, as it were, understanding what the twilight zone is. So Heidi, tell us where and what is the twilight zone exactly?
Well, so we simplify the definition of the twilight zone to be about 200 to 1,000 meters below the surface, but it's actually defined by how far sunlight goes through the ocean water. It's the tiny plankton, the ones that photosynthesize, they need sunlight to grow, and they can only live in the top layer of the ocean. So below that, where it gets much darker, is what we call the twilight zone. It's deep, it's dark, it's cold, but there's still a lot of amazing life down there. It's a really huge part of the ocean. It's about a half-mile thick layer, and anywhere that the ocean's deep enough, there's a twilight zone. So it goes around like 2/3 of the world from pole to pole. And it's one of the largest habitats on our planet Earth. It's home to countless weirdly wonderful creatures. And the more we learn about those creatures, the more important we're finding the twilight zone is to the entire ocean ecosystem, and even for all of us. We'll talk a little bit more about that. In 2018, we at WHOI launched an ambitious Ocean Twilight Zone project with funding from TED Audacious. It's really a special project with a great team of scientists, engineers, and communications experts. We're all working together to learn more about the twilight zone and share what we're finding with as many people as we possibly can.
Yeah, and we're going to talk more about how WHOI is advancing our understanding of life in the twilight zone a little bit later on. But first, I want to get us right into talking about some of those weirdly wonderful creatures. They may look a little strange to us, but each of them does have amazing adaptations to life in the twilight zone, those superpowers I mentioned earlier. Let's start with one of the more photogenic creatures in the ocean twilight zone. And we'll be seeing it in here in a second. It's the strawberry squid. There it is. It's really beautiful. Joel, why don't you start off telling us a little bit about the squid?
Yeah, these little squids are amazing. A really cool feature about them is that they have two different eyes. So the colors of the eyes, the two eyes are different, and the sizes are different. So this video from the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, or MBARI, is a really nice video. You can see the difference in the two eyes. See the smaller blue one on one side, and now the larger yellow one protruding out.
And there's
by
nothing
way-
wrong with that eye. That's just the way it is, right? It just sticks out like that.
No. So the smaller eye, it always points downward. It scans for flashes of bioluminescence. It's well adapted to see that bioluminescence down below it, looking out for any potential predator, but also looking out for prey and things to eat. The larger eye is well adapted to see as much light as possible that's coming down from above, and critters above it will cast a shadow in that light. So it's optimized to see very low light down there or up there. The strawberry squid is a source of food for many of the large apex predators in the twilight zone, such as the sperm whale or Risso's dolphins that dive down into the twilight zone to feed on all the critters that are down there.
Yeah, and Vince, this is really a beautiful example of bioluminescence. We can see that in that close-up shot and in this one too.
Yeah, I mean, if this sort of white light photos of these things weren't amazing enough, in the darkness of the twilight zone, these animals produce their own light, and they produce this elaborate and beautiful display, which is flashes of light. And they're a bioluminescent animal, which is very common in the twilight zone, less common on Earth, but more common underwater. That's the ability of a creature to create its own light. Here's another example of a jellyfish from the twilight zone that creates its own light. It's a rare ability on the Earth, but like I said, all in the ocean, it's very prevalent. It's the kind of thing I study. This is a circular pattern of the orange jellyfish that happens when it's in the water, and it's actually an interesting pattern that we have used as scientists to attract other predators of this animal. So almost all the creatures that live in the twilight zone, in the complete darkness, produce some form of light. So it's an amazing feature of them. In the darkness, there isn't enough light there, so they produce their own. And it produces a pattern on the squid it's hypnotic in some sense in that squid. So the thought is that it uses that pattern both to attract mates or potentially to confuse predators or to confuse prey prior to eating. So it's a phenomenon when you go down there, if you get a chance to be in the twilight zone and it's submersible, looking out, these creatures come upon you when your eyes adjust to the darkness, and it's like Las Vegas, I say, down there. Flashes of lights, movements of light. It's an absolute wonderland down there, which if you don't give it a chance, you don't let your eyes adjust, you won't see it. And so it's one of the spectacular features of the twilight zone.
Yeah, it really is. And this jellyfish that we're looking at, the Atolla jellyfish, has actually earned the nickname of alarm jelly due to that amazing bioluminescent display. I guess I'd like you to also just say how do they do it? How do they produce this bioluminescence? Do they have little LEDs on them? What are they doing? They
have these little things called photophores, and squid, if you've seen nice videos on YouTube about about squids and animals that live in the bright zone, they flash patterns of color on their surface. And these animals do the same thing by flashing light on their surface through little things called photophores. And in there, they culture a tiny little bacteria that they expose and show to the world, producing a pattern. So it's almost like a little TV screen all over their body. It's a kind of adaptive camouflage, or an adaptive, the only animals in the world that we know of that produce changes in their shape, in their color and their coloration, the light that they produce. It's just an amazing feature. It's a biochemical reaction produced, actually, in their case, by a bacteria that lives in their skin. Some animals produce it endogenously, like this jellyfish produces it internally. It has the processes within its body to produce light.
Wow. Heidi, I want to go to you next. I know you're a fan of a particular Twilight Zone creature. They may not be quite as flashy as the strawberry squid, but they do play an important role in moving carbon dioxide from the atmosphere down to the deep ocean.
Yeah, Véronique, I know you're talking about salps. Every time I take the quiz, it tells me my lifestyle is more like the Atolla jellyfish, but I am really fascinated by salps. These, they might look kind of weird, these little animals that live in transparent barrels and they hang out together in these colonies, but they're super important. As you mentioned, they contribute to what we call the biological carbon pump. This is where carbon from the surface ocean gets moved into deep waters through the food web. So I talked before about those tiny plankton in the surface water that photosynthesize, phytoplankton. They turn sunlight and carbon dioxide into organic matter in the upper ocean. And then they get eaten. Lots of phytoplankton get eaten every day in the ocean. And I bet everybody listening knows what happens after animals eat something. They poop, right? And that poop sinks down through the twilight zone in something that we love to call marine snow, because when you go down in a submersible or you use a camera like this, it looks like a snowstorm.
It does.
But it's not really snow, of course. It's tiny particles of carbon-rich detritus, dead organisms, bacteria, and fecal pellets or poop. And it really is beautiful to see, even if it's full of poop. Salps live in this blizzard of marine snow, and they're like vacuum cleaners. They suck up the plankton and the marine snow. They digest what they need so they can grow and live, but then they get rid of the rest, and they make amazing, like, sort of dense bricks of poop. And we sometimes call them super poopers because they make these really dense, fast sinking pellets. And their poop is amazing stuff, because if it sinks really deep into the ocean, it takes that carbon that originally was in the atmosphere and it takes it all the way down deep, deep into the ocean, where it can stay for centuries or even longer if it gets deep enough, or if it gets buried. And that matters a whole lot to all of us, because without that biological carbon pump and animals like salps, there'd be a lot more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and climate change, warming, would be even worse than we know it already is.
And salps, they can bloom themselves, so they can respond to high phytoplankton availability and start reproducing like crazy and bloom themselves. And there was a time last year when we towed our nets through a salp bloom, and we literally had to measure the number of salps in our nets using a trash can.
Yeah, I'll never forget that.
This is a short clip from that
literally
cruise.
A bucket of salps right there.
That we almost broke the net, right?
Yeah, the net, it was hard to get on board. It was pretty wild. And that they get far worse than that. I've heard of them clogging the intakes of ships. So they can be pretty abundant. So they grow quickly, they reproduce quickly, and when there's a salp feeding frenzy, that leads to a lot of fast sinking poop or export of carbon.
I don't think I've heard WHOI scientists talk about poop so much ever. Before we go on, I do want to take an audience question, because we've got one that's kind of related to what we're looking at here. Catherine would like to know why so many Twilight Zone creatures are translucent. Does somebody want to give a go at that?
Yeah, that's camouflage in the deep ocean, right? You either be translucent or potentially jet black. And you won't be seen as well, right? So any light that's down there, it either needs to reflect off something, and if it's black, it won't reflect very much, and if it's translucent, it won't reflect.
We have another question about bioluminescence too, which is so Norman would like to know, does the bioluminescence shine all the time, or can animals shut it off to foil approaching predators? Vince, maybe you want to take that one.
Yeah, it's a great question. There's different forms of it. There's forms of it that animals release, so they can sort of subdiffuge, they can spit out glowing mass and then run the other way. There's animals that have it on their body, like the squid, and they can open and close little windows so that it shows up, so they can produce patterns. There's like the anglerfish, we'll talk about in a moment, that hangs it in a lure. And some of them, many of them are triggered by movement in the water. So there's sort of alarm surfaces like dinoflagellates or copepods. When you move through them, they will release and produce light, and they're actually a way for predators to find prey. They may see these animals moving through a field of dinoflagellates, and they produce a stream, and the dinoflagellates light up when they're touched, and then the animals see them and they go and they attack. So you often see
those are little tiny bioluminescent critters, right?
Little tiny bioluminescent critters. It's absolutely stunning. Yeah.
I was really struck when you said, Vincent, that it can be hypnotic, because it really is. If you have a chance to go down in a sub, it's mesmerizing to see that triggered bioluminescence that happens as the sub is moving through the water, and it startles the animals.
And you have to sit down there for a while. You have to let your eyes adjust to complete darkness, which takes like 20 minutes. And suddenly what looked like a black world suddenly becomes visible because your eyes adjust to that. And it's a revolution. When you see it happening, it's really a shocking and amazing thing. Everything's lighting and flashing. It's amazing.
Oh, I'm envious of all of you who've gotten to go down in subs. So another kind of interesting feature of the Twilight Zone, I think that a lot of people won't have heard about, is something called the diel migration. Vincent, maybe you can tell us a little about that.
Yeah, as Heidi was saying, on the surface, the light reaches and penetrates the surface, and you have this phytoplankton up there on the top. So little tiny like plants absorbing all that energy and doing photosynthesis and creating all these carbons and everything on the surface. And deep, deep in the ocean during the day, there are animals that want to eat them that stay low. And then when night falls, they migrate up. And this migration, because it covers the entire ocean, is the largest, most profound migration on the earth that most people don't know. They rise up through hundreds and hundreds of meters of ocean water, these zooplankton, things that eat, and many of them consume and eat the phytoplankton that have been sitting at the surface, and they grab all that energy and eat it. And as morning starts to come in, they sink back down. I mean, as morning comes in, they return back to the depth again. So this migration happens every day. So we call it diurnal. It's driven obviously by the sun, but they feel it happening. Even if it's a cloudy day, they do the same return. And that's how they bring all this carbon that Heidi was talking about down into the deep ocean. And so they grab all the CO2 during photosynthesis, the animals eat it, swim down, poop it out, and it gets buried essentially on the bottom of the ocean. And that's why we call it this enormous carbon sink, or this enormous carbon pathway that brings tons of carbon, every day, tons of carbon to the bottom of the ocean and reduces the CO2 levels in the air.
It's kind of like they go up to eat in the garden at night when it's dark, and then they run and hide from their predators when the sun comes out, and they go back up to the garden the next day. Just like, I guess, the rabbits come out when we go to bed, right, and eat our vegetables.
How did we first find out about this migration?
Oh, that's a really good story.
Go ahead, Heidi. There's an interest. Yeah, that's Heidi, please.
So many, many decades ago, the Navy was using sonar to measure the bottom of the ocean, and it looked like the bottom was coming up, like it was getting really shallow because there was so much sound scattering off this layer in the ocean. They actually thought their ships were going to run aground. And it turns out that it was just these dense layers of organisms that were scattering sound so much. It looked like it was the hard bottom of the ocean. Yeah, the fact that the bottom was going up and down every day didn't seem right. So the scientists back then figured out it was animals.
If you think about how little the creatures are and how long a distance they have to travel, even for us to swim hundreds of meters, but when you're an organism that's a few millimeters in size, swimming hundreds and hundreds of meters twice a day, up and down, it's quite an amazing feat. They do this up, all the way up, eat all the way down. Billions of them, billions. It's an amazing process.
We actually have a question related to the cruise that I want you all to talk about. Heidi and Joel, I know you just came back from a research cruise that was focused on improving our understanding of how carbon, I should say, moves through the Twilight Zone. Can you talk a little bit about that cruise? Heidi, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I'd love to. Just last month, we were out in the Northwest Atlantic, so closer to Europe. Our team was on this boat you see in the front of this photo here. We were actually joined by two other big global research vessels that are part of a NASA-funded program that's called Exports. It's about export of carbon and poop. It was a really remarkable and pretty rare coordination of these three major research vessels. There were something like 150 scientists from all over the US and beyond that were part of this 3-ship big program. We were working with the community to plan this expedition for years, and it was super exciting to be out there and be part of it. And our team was studying that, what we call the spring bloom of the phytoplankton, and then how that affects the Twilight Zone through this sinking carbon. So just like your garden blooms in the spring, the phytoplankton do the same thing. And that bloom makes a lot of carbon-rich organic matter that feeds the Twilight Zone creatures and fuels the biological carbon pump. And that ultimately helps regulate climate. And we were out there trying to learn about all those things.
Yeah, that's really neat. We've actually got a short video from that cruise that we'd like to share. It was produced by videographer Marley Parker, who was out on the cruise with Heidi and Joel.
The ocean is such a challenging place to understand. We need lots of diverse specializations and perspectives to hope to figure it out.
So we're out here as part of a larger program called Exports. It's about the export, a transfer of carbon from the top to the bottom of the ocean. Now this has been long in the making. Over 5 years we've been planning for this. We're able to, through the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution's Twilight Zone program, bring new technologies out here, additional scientists who are actually studying the same processes but in different ways. We also have new autonomous vehicles that we're bringing out to the NASA-funded program. So we're trying to coordinate 3 ships in one location. That's something I've never done in my 30-plus year career.
What we're learning about the Twilight Zone is going to help us be better stewards of such an important part of our planet. We know that there's a lot of life in the Twilight Zone. This has caught the attention of industrial fishing, and we really don't want to have a fishery go forward that might lead to ecosystem collapse, have impacts throughout the ocean food web, and potentially impacts on the climate of the entire planet.
When we tow the net through the waters, you never know what you're going to get. And so there's this excitement of bringing that cod in, the end of the net on board, rinsing it all down, and then doing that last dump into the bucket, just hoping to see something really cool. And we always do, but you never know what it's going to be.
It's always so fun to pull up these buckets and sort through them, to get your hands on them and see all of the intricacies, show them to other people and see the excitement on their faces. And as a student, it's phenomenal to be able to touch some of these organisms that are in such a hard-to-reach part of the ocean.
Really, to get this many resources, 3 ships together, studying this mid-water zone, twilight zone, with all of these instruments, scientists from all over the world, different disciplines. This is a fundamentally transformational kind of event to really make things happen here that we've never been able to do before in ocean sciences.
That last image there was actually of an atoll, a jellyfish. We heard the voice of chemist Ken Bissler from the OTZ project talking about innovative technologies, new technologies that are being used. Heidi, can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, we used a bunch of different new technologies. I'm especially a fan of the imaging approaches that we used. And I myself, I worked really hard deploying this towed vehicle. We call it Stingray. We pull the Stingray behind the ship and we move it up and down through the whole Twilight Zone. And we attach as many sensors as we possibly can fit on it so that we are making all kinds of measurements of the water and also what's in it. And one of the coolest sensors on there is a shadowgraph camera system. We also have an acoustic sensor, like I was talking about the Navy using to measure the bottom, and we can use that to detect animals in the Twilight Zone.
And those are shadowgraph images, right, that we're seeing there?
Yeah, these are some of the images that we collect with that system. And they might look kind of simple, you know, they're black and white, but they're incredibly detailed and they allow us to see some of these really fragile animals. You see a couple of salps there and a medusa and a siphonophore, and they give us all kinds of detail that we can't get otherwise. Much of what we know about Twilight Zone animals is based on net tows, and some of these really fragile animals are really underestimated when we pull a net through the water because they just break up, they don't survive. And the shadowgraphs allow us to see them in their natural state and right down in the Twilight Zone because we put the camera system down there. It gives us a flood of data. We collect 15 images a second for hours and hours and hours. So we come back with a huge amount of data, millions of images, and we're now using artificial intelligence to help us analyze all of those images.
Wow.
Yeah,
Joel, we saw you in that
addition-
video. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, in addition to the high-tech stuff, we have to actually get our hands on specimens for other analyses. So we use the tried and true technique of towing nets through the water to bring things up. bringing the nets back on board is always one of the highlights for the cruise. All the scientists and the crew gather around and sneak a peek at all the creatures that are living down there. The big net system that we use, we call it the Mach Ness, or the Mach Ness monster. The Mach Ness stands for multiple open and closing net and environmental sensing system. It's a sort of a high-tech version of the traditional plankton net that tows behind the research ship. It actually has several nets kind of all together, and we can open and close each net with the click of a mouse on board, allowing us to know where our critters have come from in the water column. So that's pretty important to understanding their migrations and everything about that. Back in the lab, we use the organisms to answer fundamental questions like how long the fish live. We can do that with things in their heads called otoliths or ear stones. We can look at how fast and how well they're reproducing. This is important for knowing how resilient they would be to any fishing pressure that might develop in the future. My favorite creature of the cruise is probably this really cool hatchet fish. It was unusually large. It's one of the largest ones I've ever seen. Most of them are quite small, and it was pretty cool. And along its belly, you can see the photophore. So we talked about bioluminescence before. All those dots down there are bioluminescing or light emitting organs that cast a pretty faint level of light to let them blend in with the faint light that's coming down from above them. So that's their camouflage for anything that might look at them from below.
We have a question from Lisa, who wants to know, we saw you sticking your hand in a barrel of salps earlier, Joel. How do you know you can touch these organisms with your bare hands, and are they ever toxic, and how would you know?
You take a somewhat of a risk. Most things out there aren't going to sting you. I have been on cruises where we caught a good number of large jellyfish, so huge jellyfish, and they stung a little bit. You hear stories of like an electric ray getting caught in a net and people getting shocked quite badly by them. But generally, there's not much to worry about, so we just dive right in.
And I wanted to ask this question from a teacher, Carolyn. She says she followed our recent Dive and Discover cruise to the Twilight Zone. So while this cruise was going on, we were having a program called Dive and Discover, which allows you to kind of follow along with the cruise as it's happening and learn about what's going on. And she did that with her middle school students. And she wanted to know, Heidi, if you have any preliminary findings yet.
Oh, we have a whole bunch of interesting hints. Sometimes you might think you go out, you just know right away, but we come back with lots of data and it takes us a long time to sift through and be sure about what we've learned. But from the imaging that we were doing with the shadowgraph system, I feel pretty confident that we found a bumper spring bloom of phytoplankton. And we saw the ways that over the few weeks we were out there, that phytoplankton bloom was changing, being eaten, turning into marine snow, and sinking down into the ocean twilight zone. So what I was talking about earlier, we were able to actually measure it, and we saw it happening. So I'm really excited now to use the machine learning to figure out what the animals were doing while that bloom was happening and then ending and sinking out.
Neat. I want to take one more question here before we continue. I know I've lost it. Shoot. What? I lost the one I wanted to ask. I'm sorry. Well, Nina wants to know why it was necessary to have 3 ships out there. That's pretty unusual, right? For a cruise, normally you're just going out in one ship. It's not normally coordinated even with one other ship. So why 3 this time?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say a little bit. I'm sure Joel can chime in too. 3 ships is actually just the tip of the iceberg. We had all kinds of things in the water. The 3 ships were the biggest, but we had autonomous gliders that were going through the water. We had floats. There were about 50 things in the water, autonomous floats, sediment traps that were a drifter that we were following to track a mass of water over the course of our experiment out there, a natural experiment. And because we were trying to deploy all of those different technologies and use every approach we could think of, from measuring the DNA of a microbe all the way up to Joel catching everything in a net, people on the other ships were measuring how fast the plankton were growing, how fast they were taking up nutrients from the ocean. We had so many different disciplines represented that we needed that many ships to get everybody out there.
Yeah, and I heard you were doing all this in some not so great weather.
Yeah, we had some pretty horrible weather out there for much of the cruise. About half of the time, we weren't even able to do science. 3 storms came through that prevented us from doing any sampling. And this footage I took from the bridge during one of those storms. The winds were about 48 knots sustained. Seas were about 25 feet. I posted this video on Twitter and people were saying they were getting seasick just
I was going to say, I can't really watch that right now.
The video is short, but in real life, it just went on and on and on. The bad weather was never ending out there. It was amazing. I've been on a lot of cruises and never had that much bad weather.
In that video that Marley put together, we looked all happy and we're working hard. That was half the time. And the other half, we were probably lying down in bed.
Mm-hmm. Vincent, I bet you've lived through some weather in your time.
I spent 3 weeks off the coast of Chile trying to find Humboldt squid, and in 25-foot seas in a smaller boat. And yes, you just wanted to curl up and die. And on the last day of the 3 weeks, the squid showed up, and the sun opened, and the seas flattened, and we were all happy. But we didn't forget the pain we had to endure to get there.
Yeah. So Joel, I want to go back to you and talk a little bit more about some of the fish you brought up in the nets. As we saw in that video, they're pretty small, right?
They are, and even though they're small, they have big teeth and big mouths and big eyes and stuff. And so zoomed in, they look pretty ferocious. But they're most of them are quite small, but they're numerous. For these bristlemouths that you see here on your screen, there's potentially a quadrillion of them in the ocean. Which is a hard number to wrap your head around, but it would be the most abundant vertebrate on the earth. They're small but mighty. They've got really cool adaptations. These are the superpowers that you mentioned in the opening. Big jaws, big teeth, especially when you relative to their body size. They're just really, really interesting. Wow. And they're weird, yes, when we look at them, but they're perfectly adapted for what they do. And what we can't see in these images, they have really cool mating behaviors. It's dark down there. It's hard to find a mate. So there are some really cool adaptations to mating in the twilight zone. One is for the anglerfish female to be fairly large, but the male to be about the size of your pinky finger. And once that male finds the female, it actually latches on with his jaws and stays there for the rest of his life and becomes pretty much a non-feeding just sack of sperm that contributes to reproduction.
That's one way to
a lot of other fish.
It's monogamous.
A lot of other fish.
I think we have a picture of an anglerfish. We can see there it is.
Yeah.
Nice.
Baby,
so
right?
You can imagine the male would be just a tiny little thing hanging off her belly. And
just fish.
Yeah. And other fish are simultaneous hermaphrodites, meaning they have both sex organs at the same time. And that doubles your chance of finding a mate that you can mate with. So if you're both male and female, if you find someone else in the same species, they're going to be male and female too. And you don't have to worry about finding a female or a male.
I guess not. Vincent, what is that funny thing hanging off of the anglerfish's head?
So these kind of fish that exist in the shallow waters put little wiggly, squirrely things that attract fish. But in the twilight zone, where there's very little light, this animal has adopted to having bioluminescence in that lure that's on the top of its head. But the part about it that's bizarre is that the animal does not itself have the genes to produce bioluminescence. So what it does is it's a microbiologist. And what it does is it accumulates a type of bacteria in that orb over its head. And that bacteria, only when there's enough of them present, become bioluminescent. So it provides a little home for bioluminescent bacteria, which by and large are fairly fairly rare in the twilight zone, but they accumulate them and grow them in that orb. And then when they go to a certain quantity, they become very bright. And the animal uses that to dangle, and other animals see it and go after it. I was featured in Nemo. As you remember, poor little Nemo got stuck in one of these things. And yeah, they must be devastating to go up and think that you've found a nice, delicious bioluminescent meal, and then the next thing you know, you're a meal. That's probably what life is like down there.
This fish, you can also see another adaptation that's in many Twilight Zone fish, is that the mouth is so big compared to the size of the body. So they can eat just about anything they encounter, fit it in their mouth.
That's amazing. Let's see. Oh, this is a neat question. Mark would like to know, is the Twilight Zone the same everywhere around the world? Who wants that one?
Good question.
Yeah, you want to go?
So technically the Twilight Zone, we say between 200 and 1,000 meters, but it's really defined by light levels. And so on average, that light level at the top is at 200 meters, but that can vary quite a bit depending on what's above it, right? So if there's a good bit of phytoplankton or turbidity or something, the technical definition of the top of the Twilight Zone would actually be shallower. So that's how the actual depth of the Twilight Zone could vary quite a bit around the world.
What about the animals that live there? Is it pretty homogeneous, or do we know?
There's a good bit of structure. So go ahead, Heidi.
Well, I was just going to say that there's a lot we don't know, but it seems like the more we look, the more patterns seem to emerge. And one example is that you look out over the ocean and it looks kind of homogeneous, but there's actually sort of ocean weather patterns where there are, just like we see storms swirling through the atmosphere, there are eddies swirling through the ocean. And some of the scientists on our OTZ team are using tags on top predators. They tag them with a satellite tracker, and they're able to figure out that these animals that are diving deep down into the Twilight Zone to feed on all of those fish and zooplankton, they're especially going to these eddies and diving around often the edges of the eddies. So it suggests that there's special patterns that are set up along with that sort of weather of the ocean.
Very cool. And another great question from Rachel: are seasons felt by species in the Twilight Zone?
I think, Joel was talking about how where the light penetrates influences the depth of the Twilight Zone, where the animals live and what they experience. And so certainly to the extent that seasons are, we see seasons change with the light levels change with the seasons, that would be affected.
The critters down there also respond to the amount of food above them. So if there's not a ton of food above them, sometimes they won't migrate up. And so since there is seasonality to the productivity in the surface waters, there is an effect on the Twilight Zone creatures down there in terms of the amount of food that they have available to them. And that changes with time of year, especially, as you get towards temperate and polar waters. And in the tropics, probably not so much.
Yeah, so like that spring bloom I was talking about, we were studying on the cruise, would be a big effect.
It all comes back to that balance of eating and not being eaten. And so that's driving that migration. They want to come up to eat in the darkness because they don't want to be seen by their predators. So it's a fine line there. You got to eat to survive, but you got to avoid being eaten to survive as well.
We were a few weeks ago in the Azores chasing Rizzo dolphins on a cruise, and the Rizzo dolphins really follow this migration quite closely for their predators. So that the little guys are eaten by bigger and then bigger and bigger, and finally it gets to the point of the larger squid that are chasing this migration. And then of course the dolphins are on the surface, but they'll do deep dives hundreds of meters below, and they determine day or night, based the tags are up, where they go based on where that layer has risen. So during the night they're up higher. feeding, and then during the days they're much lower in the column. So they're also aware of these movements, and they follow wherever these squid are. Somehow they find them as they're moving around on the surface. They somehow identify that there's a patch of squid, and they dive down to get them. So they're paying attention to the non-homogeneous nature of the local twilight zone area. Pretty amazing.
Marine mammals have a leg up on most everything else because a lot of them can use sonar to find things. So they don't need light levels really to find their prey. And so there's really no hope for anything that's going to be eaten by the marine mammals that use sonar.
We use acoustics on our cruises, and we hope to do half as well as the marine mammals.
Well, actually, we have a related question from Carrie. Can we eat fish from the twilight zone? We've been talking about animals eating each other in the twilight zone, or predators diving down. Do we eat fish from the twilight zone?
If I just say something about that is at the top of the hour, we talked a bit about the exploitation of the twilight zone. And one of the problems going forward is that although humans may not eat some of the stuff that comes out of the twilight zone, a lot of it is removed in the form of krill and other organisms like those myctophids and those little lanternfish you saw, and fed in fish farms. So there's a massive amount of fishing already going on in that zone in the Southern Ocean, but it's not necessarily ending up on human plates directly, except it is through being fed through fish farms. So a large percent of the krill in the Southern Ocean is collected every year and fed in fish farms, and also produces oils and things. So it's a heavily exploited zone. Some would say overexploited because it doesn't have the obvious game fish that we generally people associate with it, and cod and tuna, things like that. But so I would leave it to the rest to talk about fish that are in the zone. But yeah, it is already heavily exploited, unfortunately.
Yeah, and just to be clear, so no, I don't think anybody's actually, or very few people are actually fishing down in the twilight zone. But because of that migration that you were talking about, Vincent, those species, some of those species do come up to the surface, and that's when people are harvesting them.
There hasn't been a sustainable, financially feasible and sustainable fishery developed yet. But as technology advances and as we overfish coastal fisheries, people are looking at the twilight zone for sure, whether they're deep or shallow. And as Vincent says, a lot of that fish would actually probably go to feed aquaculture fish rather than us eating them directly. There are fish that you eat that do feed on twilight zone animals. So if you care about bluefin tuna and sharks and everything else, right? Most of them are diving down, and that's where they get their food. It's not really in the surface water.
Yep. I want to wrap up our creature features with one last one that happens to be my favorite. We've got a video here that made the rounds on social media not too long ago, so you may have seen it. But audience, we've got one more poll for you. Give us your best guess at what we're looking at here. So we seem to have some people who have seen this video before or are just very knowledgeable. So we will see the results here. Yes, it's a siphonophore. That's exactly right. And it's a pretty amazing video clip. It was taken by our colleagues at the Schmidt Ocean Institute with the remotely operated vehicle called Sebastian off the coast of Western Australia last year. This siphonophore measured an incredible 150 feet. So it's hard to tell how big that is looking at this, but it's a very big, long siphonophore that we're seeing there. Not all siphonophores are that big, of course, but they are pretty amazing. Heidi, they're actually a collection of animals. Is that right?
Yeah, they come in many sizes. Some are, as small as a nickel, and others stay together, all these little animals together in a colony that can get, like, in this case, longer than a blue whale. When you look closer, this is a shadowgraph image. You can see the individual, we call them zooids. They're part of the colony, but each one is an individual animal. Many of them are specialized, though. Some have tentacles to catch prey. Some do the digestion, some reproduce, some help them swim. So you see the swimming bell, the large one at the top, and the tentacles are retracted in this one, but all of the little zooids down the chain are the sort of hunters with the stinging tentacles. They're mostly transparent, like you can see right through them with the shadow graph, and their colonies are long and thin. They look a little bit like salps, but they have very different lifestyles. Like, the salps are just filtering out plankton and marine snow, and these siphonophores are fierce hunters using their stinging tentacles.
Yeah, so the salps can be in colonies too, but they don't specialize the way this individual siphonophores do.
And they don't have tentacles and
right.
stings to catch their prey with stingers.
Yeah. I want to take one more question here from Michelle. How many people have actually been to the Twilight Zone? I know all of you have, but
I don't know.
Not many. That's a good question.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so.
But
People, you have to be in a submersible to get down there to those depths. I don't think there are, if you want to get a good look at some of these creatures, my recommendation is in Hawaii, in places like this off the coast of Hawaii. There's very deep water in it. You can do very late night dives to 50, 60 feet. And for reasons, these animals come close to the surface. And if you want to see a bunch of siphonophores and beautiful organisms, a blackwater dive is a really special type of a dive, because you're getting into the very top layer of some of these creatures, not really into the Twilight Zone, but some of them that are down there come up at very late at night in places where there's very deep water. So you're diving in 1,000 meters of water, but you're only on the surface, and you'll see some beautiful salps and siphonophores and things.
Yeah, and I should say that not all siphonophores live in the Twilight Zone, right? There's actually some that our audience may have seen in person, and that's the Portuguese man-o-war. I think they're really beautiful, but they do pack a very powerful sting, so you don't want to get too close. I'd like to close out our conversation tonight with sort of a look ahead. Vincent, maybe we'll start with you. What's next for OceanX? Any plans related to the Twilight Zone?
Yeah, we are very interested in some of the larger, more charismatic critters that are at the top of that food chain, the giant squids, the whales that go down into these depths and feed. So we are currently on a bit of an adventure studying the Twilight Zone as we speak, actually. We began looking at squid and Rizzo's dolphins that dive in the area, and now we're headed to look for the very elusive member of that zone, the giant squid, which is very, very prevalent apparently down there based on what we know, but we never ever get to see them. So one of our missions, because we know they're there because the sperm whales go down, for example, the Azores, and they eat these animals because you find them you find their beaks in what they leave behind, and also you see the scars on their faces from these large.
The beaks of the squid.
Beaks of the squid, yeah. And so we're down there in a few next weeks. We'll be hunting and seeing if we can chase the sperm whales down to find the giant squid in the Twilight Zone. So
not literally hunting with cameras.
No, yes, not hunting. It's hunting. Trying to get pictures of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Heidi, how about the WHOI's Ocean Twilight Zone project? What's next for us?
Yeah, our team has our next cruise coming right up after 4th of July. We will be going out to deploy some moorings that are part of a new Ocean Twilight Zone observation network. The network is really a first of its kind, and it's made possible by a generous donation from the Hubble Foundation. So with this network, instead of a few measurements here or there, we'll be able to observe the Twilight Zone over a huge area spanning 250,000 square kilometers, and do that around the clock and over long time. And a key feature of the network is an array of sound sources that can be used with tracking tags to locate things underwater, everything from vehicles and floats to large animals like sharks and tuna that you can put these tracking tags on. There's no GPS or Wi-Fi network in the Twilight Zone, so we need new technologies like this to open up all kinds of cool possibilities. It's really exciting to look forward to this network, and folks can follow along our project and find out how it goes.
Yeah, so GPS doesn't work underwater, right? So we're gonna tag these sharks and tuna and kind of use them to guide us to where the highest concentrations of their prey are, which might be areas of interest to scientists too.
Exactly. And we can put the same kind of tag inside the sound insonified network, and we can put it on sensors, and we can follow the sensors and communicate with them.
Yeah, really neat stuff. Joel, you get the last word tonight. Why is it important for us to learn about life in the twilight zone and celebrate its weirdness, if I can put it that way?
Yeah, so as you've all seen tonight, twilight zone animals are wonderfully weird. They're really cool, incredible adaptations to their life in an extreme environment. And that diversity and specialization is their superpower, just as it is with humans. We actually, the OTZ project, I'm not a children's book author, we actually have a children's book coming out about all of that. We're going to see here in a second, I think, the cover of that book. It's called Where the Weird Things Are, an Ocean Twilight Zone Adventure. And it follows Meso, the Mesobot, WHOI's intrepid underwater explorer robot, as it's launched into the Twilight Zone and meets many of the wonderful creatures that live there. We just announced the book yesterday. It's scheduled to be published in 2022, January 2022. And we think it's a great way to bring the message of the wonder, the value of the ocean twilight zone to young readers. The story will help them learn about themselves, their world, and the need to protect the world.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for tonight. I want to say a big thank you to Heidi, Sosik, Joel Llopiz, and Vincent Pieribone for participating in this fun and fascinating conversation with all of you out there about the weird and wonderful creatures of the ocean twilight zone. Thank you also to my WHOI colleagues who've been working very hard all season behind the scenes to make this event and all our Ocean Encounters events possible. And to everyone out there who joined us, thank you. If you haven't yet taken our quiz to find out which Ocean Twilight Zone creature you are most like, please go to keepitweird.org and try it out. Once you do, please share your results from that quiz on your favorite social media platform. You'll be helping us at WHOI raise awareness of the Twilight Zone and the weirdly wonderful animals that live there. You should also check out our Ocean Twilight Zone store. That's at go.whoi.edu/shop-weird. You'll find really cool Ocean Twilight Zone t-shirts, hats. There's some fun, weird, bizarre animal hats for kids. And we've got some really nice special Ocean Twilight Zone themed gifts for that special weird someone in your life. You get a 15% event discount for joining us tonight. Just type in the discount code, you guessed it, WEIRD. And to learn more about the Twilight Zone and find out the latest about WHOI's research there, please visit our Ocean Twilight Zone website. That's at twilightzone.whoi.edu. Tonight's event was the last in our third season of WHOI's Ocean Encounters virtual events. Please join us for a new season next fall. And if you missed any of our past events or just want to watch them again, you can find those recordings at whoi.edu/ocean-encounters. If you've been enjoying our Ocean Encounters program, you can be part of WHOI's solution-based approach to ocean science. Please consider becoming a WHOI member. You'll be providing crucial support for our outreach and our science, and you'll get some great benefits in return. Memberships start at just $35 a year. The average gift is $100, but any amount helps. Your support will make a difference. We've got a short video for you about WHOI's Ocean Twilight Zone project, so please stay with us for a few more minutes for that. And on behalf of Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, thank you and good night.
You're in the pitch black in the middle of the ocean twilight zone. The sublights come on, and what you see looks like a blizzard of snow. When you look even closer, there are tiny microscopic plankton jumping from one particle to another.
The great age of exploration didn't end in the 1800s, it's continuing. And the Twilight Zone is that next frontier.
The twilight zone is this vast realm of the ocean below the sunlit surface layers, down about 1,000 meters.
And it's about half a mile thick, like 2 Empire State Buildings stacked on top of one another. It extends around 2/3 of our globe.
It's deep, it's dark, it's corrosive.
We started out thinking of it as one layer, and we're now realizing there are many layers within layers. It's a very structured and complex habitat.
It's a mysterious, high-pressure, low-temperature environment. We used to think of the ocean twilight zone as something of a desert, and we weren't aware of all the incredible biomass and biodiversity.
The fish have adaptations that are hard to believe. Cool critters with their big teeth and their lights on their bellies and their lights under their eyes.
There's amazing stuff there that we don't understand.
The more we learn about the ocean twilight zone, the more important we are finding it seems to be for the whole ocean ecosystem.
Any open ocean organism is relying heavily on the ocean twilight zone. Things that we eat ourselves, tuna, sharks, big top predators in the ocean, they all feed on these little critters.
Animals that live in the twilight zone play a major role in regulating our planet's climate.
We took all of the marine life out of the twilight zone. That would have huge impacts on the ocean's ability to sequester carbon. Whether you're living inland or you're seeing the effects of sea level rise, if you're in the interior, that will affect all of us.
It will be a critical piece of how humans both sustain and thrive in the following century.
The opportunity that we have in exploring the twilight zone is really exceptional for humanity to understand a new frontier.
Because this area of the ocean is so undersampled, the potential for discovery is enormous.
There might be 10 times or perhaps even 100 times of the biomass than we had thought previously. And if these numbers are correct, that completely changes the way that we view the functioning of the entire ocean.
We're only just learning how important the twilight zone is. Getting to those answers, getting to those fine details of how the twilight zone fits into the bigger picture of the planet is a phenomenal undertaking.
The ocean twilight zone is a huge habitat. We know almost nothing about it because it's extremely difficult to study. A place like the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution is poised to change that because we have experienced engineers who know how to build the technologies that help us to overcome the incredible challenges.
New tools coming online, new ways of observing, new technologies, new sensors, autonomous underwater vehicles, it can be ocean observatories.
Robots that go down and find these critters in their natural habitat.
Could really be a game changer, revolutionize our ability to study the twilight zone.
We have so many things yet to learn. We need answers to these important questions quickly.
We don't know enough about the ocean twilight zone to be able to see the impact that we're having on it yet.
Now's the time where we could make wise decisions that would prevent a future disaster.
We're really beginning to accelerate the speed of discovery. The stakes could not be higher. We have an opportunity here to do things differently right now.